Learning game development is hard. I've been working at this for a few months on and off, and by far the hardest challenge I've faced is knowing what direction to go in. I know I'm not ready yet for a big long term project, mainly because I really suck at the moment. I just don't know enough, and I don't have all the time in the world to do game jams with their super short deadlines. I have been contemplating this problem for a few weeks now, and I came across this post on the Godot subreddit talking about the same issue I'm having. And somebody commented about a 20 game challenge and a website that actually lays out the rules and guidelines for you. And I thought this would be perfect for what I want to do in the meantime, so I dove into it head first. So here's the website for the challenge, and I'll also leave a link in the description below for you guys to check it out yourself. But right now I'm just going to go over the rules quickly on what this challenge is, how it works, and what the end goal of it is. The goal of the 20 game challenge is to gradually learn more about game development through a series of small projects. At the end of the challenge, you should be comfortable creating games in your engine of choice without a tutorial. This is not a tutorial. Instead, you should think of it more like a syllabus. If you do everything yourself during the challenge, then you will have practice estimating, planning, programming, and polishing your game. You'll also be able to create the music, sound effects, 2D and 3D art that you'll need. Each of these skills can take a lifetime to master, but you will at least be familiar with every major aspect of video game development, and you'll be able to estimate the scope of any game you want to make in the future. Now this intro is exactly what I'm looking for. I want something quick that I can take my time with and try to learn basically every little thing about game development. Prerequisites. You don't need any special skills or training to get started making games. If you have never made a game before, then there are a few things you might want to do before you jump in. And now these are kind of things I've already done. I've already made a few games now in Godot, and I feel very comfortable in it. And I also feel comfortable doing the very basics of programming and throwing things into the engine. So this part doesn't really apply to me as much. The challenge. Make up to 20 games on your own, starting with 10 of the recommended games or a game of similar scope. Each game will build on the fundamentals while introducing new concepts. By the end of game 10, you should be able to make a 2D or simple 3D game. You don't have to do everything. Some games are conceptually simple, but contain a lot of content. For these games, you might want to make a single level instead of the entire game. This is called a vertical slice. Check each game's definition of done for more details. At this point, you should know how to make a simple game. There are still a lot of advanced concepts to learn though. The second set of games are directed at expanding your knowledge. Try to come up with a goal or theme for yourself, and pick games that will help you reach your goal. The goal of the challenge is to learn how to make games in 20 games or less, so you might be ready to start a different project after only 10 or 15 games. End with a capstone. Make a game that is either 1, larger than before, or 2, more difficult to complete and take some extra time to polish it up. This is your chance to show off everything you've learned during the challenge. Now these rules are perfect for what I'm trying to do, and I want to be able to learn game development somewhat quickly so I can move on to a very long-term project where maybe it's something I release on Steam. Maybe it's of high enough quality where I think it deserves to be on Steam. Maybe it's so I can be better at game jams later on and pick and choose some ones that I really focus on. I just want to be able to get better, and this is just a good medium for that, I think. Additional rules. No tutorials are allowed. Looking up specific questions, how to move an object, how to save to disk, etc. is fair game though. After all, the single most important skill for any game developer is the ability to find answers online. Every rule does have exceptions, so don't feel bad if you need to break it. Understand though that following steps one at a time is not necessarily the same as learning. If you need to watch a tutorial, watch it in its entirety, then return to your game. This will ensure that you are still putting in the work needed to learn and grow. Constrain yourself. This isn't a game jam, so you don't need to make a game in a single weekend. However, I would highly recommend setting a time limit so each game doesn't take a year to complete. You can always polish the project more, but setting constraints and moving on is a good skill to learn. I would recommend 20 hours of actual development time as a starting time limit for a project, but you might need more time than that depending on your prior knowledge and skill level. Later, larger projects will take longer to complete simply due to the amount of content larger games contain. Be flexible. You should start out with one of the recommended games. After that, feel free to try new things and challenge yourself. Start out with a rough plan and be willing to personalize the challenge and substitute different projects in as you go. You'll learn new things and you might have some new ideas you want to experiment with after a while. Now, these points are amazing. I think the big one was constrain yourself. You know, we're not in a game jam. There's no rush. We don't have to finish this in a weekend or a week or however short of a time the game jam decides to give you. I also think being flexible is important, as in I don't think this is going to be something I complete in its entirety, but it's a great point to basically push me in a direction on where to go, because I honestly was feeling a little lost. I didn't know where to go to get better help besides actually making a game. And that's kind of what I did with RC Space Defenders. I knew that was going to be a Space Invaders kind of asteroid clone, and I knew that it was just going to be a stepping stone at trying to get better at game development. So I think this is a great thing that's going to help propel me even farther along with that. So let's move into the first game that I started on, and that is Flappy Bird here. Listed here are the goals and the stretch goals for the completing the game, and I will go through how I completed each one now in Godot and cross them off as we go. Now, the first part of the project that I worked on was creating an object that would serve as our character player and have a constant force applied to it that will make it fall to the ground. So here is our chicken, or Nugget, who is going to be flying through all our tubes and obstacles later on. Now, as you can see here, Nugget has a constant force applied to him that will launch him down into the abyss. The code here is very simple. It basically just taking the velocity and adding on the gravity times delta and moving the sliding based on that. So every frame, the gravity is adding on to the velocity and pulling our friend down. We're also checking for an input, which is the space bar, that will basically add a jump force to our little Nugget and propel him upwards. Now, we had an issue initially where I didn't have these lines of code here, and what it looked like was as the velocity was coming down and we kept pressing space and spamming it, we actually would add too much velocity in the top direction and he would fly off the screen. Our way around it was these two lines of code where we add this tween, where essentially after we push the input, the velocity will be applied, and then very quickly that velocity will be set back down to 0 and eventually being taken over again by the initial gravity that we've put in above. With this, it'll give it a parabolic shape where the jump force will be applied, and then it'll be set back to 0 at the apex, and then we'll fall back down to gravity. Now that looks like this now, where we get this nice parabolic shape where we can't fly off the screen because we're never actually adding on that jump force consecutively. Now, the more complicated thing by far was getting the tubes set up correctly. Here we have the tube, which is essentially just a bunch of area 2Ds kind of mangled together. We have two kill zones, which are basically overlapped with the sprite here, which will trigger the kill scene. We also have a thin area 2D here that is essentially for collecting points. So as the player moves through that area, it'll play a sound and add to your score. And then this area 2D on the left here is used basically to identify the shape of the tube, or identify that the tube has gone through a certain point. And we'll use this later on in the main scene, and I'll explain it more in depth there. Now here in the main scene, we have the tube set up with our player and everything set up to completion here. We have our floor, which is part of a goal, which is another kill zone essentially for our chicken. We also have what is this area 2D over here. Now, the challenge presents another challenge where we have to think about how we want to have the tubes come into the game. So there are three really main ways to do this. The first one is to just add maybe 50 or 60 tubes over to the right here at a certain distance apart and manually set up where they're going to be at. The drawback to this is that the game is going to look the exact same every single time somebody plays it, and that's extremely time consuming and just not good. That's a terrible way to do this, actually. Another way would be to have a spawning system where the tubes will be instantiated into the scene and then given a random Y position where the opening the tube will be different each time it's spawned in, and then later on just despawn the tube once it's off the screen. This can work. It's probably a much better way than the first one, but I don't think it's the best way, and I think the challenge here gives off the hint on what is the best way, and that would be to recycle the tubes. So there is only 3 tubes in my game at all times, and these tubes will move across the screen at a certain speed, and as they hit this big area 2D on the other side, it will reset the position back to this point here and then assign a random Y value to the position. So that way, when we load in the game, it'll instantiate 3 tubes and that will be it. There will be no more tubes instantiated or deleted throughout the entirety of the game for as long as you're in it. This will help immensely in the processing time, and you're not constantly adding new things and deleting them into the game. Although 3 things, it probably wouldn't have overloaded the game, but for bigger projects, this could be a useful tip or trick to use. And with this, it's essentially infinite. So I can have this run through and you can go up to 1,000,000 points if you could somehow keep your attention, locked in and not mess up. And with that, the main goals of the challenge were actually complete already. I moved on to the stretch goals, were just really simple ones like playing a sound every time you get points, which is very easy to implement. Game over screen, very easy. Tracking the high score between sessions was a little trickier, but when you're only tracking one variable, it's very, very easy to implement. And then just the background art. It's a very neat parallaxing background effect, although the art itself is kind of awful. But without further ado, here is Flappy Nugget in its completion. So, I mean, it's just like the original game, the tubes, you roll through, you get your point. You have some lovely music, I like to think, in the background playing for you, and you just, you move through the tubes that are coming at you infinitely. And I think I really enjoy it and how it looks and what it plays as. It does exactly what I was hoping for. I think this is gonna be a really great stepping stone in my game development journey. And I think it's just gonna add value to my overall skills, and hopefully I can maybe add value out into the world with the games I make. So I don't think Flappy Nugget is a piece of trash. Maybe you guys think different. Let me know in the comments. I think this will be a great way to focus in on something and hopefully get to my long-term goal, which is a long-term project where I can really just use the skills I've gathered, and maybe, who knows, if it's high enough quality, I'd love to put it on Steam and, make it good enough where people want to put a monetary value on it and be willing to pay for it. Because I think if you can get to a point where something you create is of value, you're making high quality things, and that's what I want to do. I want to make high quality things. I want to make things that are inherently good, that make people happy. And that's just the goal. I think that's what everybody wants, So hopefully this video is that as well. Probably not, but hopefully it is, and you enjoyed it, and you've already liked, and you've already subscribed, and we'll move on and hit the next game running. I already know what I'm gonna do. I already have some of the assets ready, thanks to my beautiful wife, and we're gonna be ready to make another video again like this. I will give you a little tidbit. This took me 3 times to record because of BS, but if you made it this far, I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one, okay? Thank you again. Bye-bye.